everybody, my name is Myung Moon and welcome to iHome Church. For those of you joining us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our email list. I'm sure that many of you celebrated a wonderful, happy 55th True Children's Day on November 22nd. And for me, every time the Children's Day rolled around, it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of ask myself a very simple question. I usually like to start off the day asking, here we are celebrating this day that celebrates the children of the world, we as sons and daughters of God. And the question that I like to ask myself is, what kind of a child or what kind of a son and a daughter are we? Or what kind of a son and a daughter should we be? And, when I think about this, my thoughts in particular this week turn to the story of Mr. Goto and his stunning victory in the Japanese courts. I'm sure you're well aware of the story of Mr. Goto. We've been talking about it for many, many years. And he was somebody who was kidnapped, abducted, and put through a deprogramming, or what we call the faith-breaking situation, where different members of his family working together with a deprogrammer, and many times in Japan, different Christian ministers who are heavily involved in this work come together and confine our brothers and sisters in different places, in apartments or different buildings, and go through the process of deprogramming or faith breaking, so that they can be forced to leave the Unification Church. And the story of Mr. Goto has been an incredible one for me to come to understand, because he was not only kidnapped and confined for merely a couple years, and even being confined for a week against your will is an incredible violation of human rights and egregious violation of the religious freedom. But he was incarcerated and confined for 12 years and 5 months. And basically, he was thrown out into the streets of Japan when his family, burdened with the financial responsibility of continually paying these deprogrammers for the 12 years and 5 months, finally decided that they had enough and literally threw him out. And his story is an incredible story, in that this is a man truly fighting for his own right to exercise his belief system. And the incredible thing about his story is that the perpetrators of the crime are members of his own family. And they are the ones who are kind of working in conjunction with these deprogrammers and different Christian ministers to hopefully convince Mr. Goto to leave his faith and become a normal citizen of Japan, whatever that means. And even though Mr. Goto, after being released and thrown out, found his way back to the church and have pleaded and hopefully was hoping for some kind of justice through the Japanese courts, the Japanese courts failed to recognize his situation as any violation, and in their language termed it as family matter. And therefore did not want to deal with it, and literally, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to what Mr. Goto has been going through. But as I've shared with you in my last sermon, I really feel that 2014 has been a year of different walls coming down of sorts. And it certainly has been a year where Mr. Goto could celebrate a wall in his life coming down, and that was the wall of resistance from the Japanese courts to recognize the violations that took place while he was confined for 12 years and 5 months. And the courts ordered his brother and his sister-in-law to pay Mr. Goto 22 million yen, and ordered the deprogrammer, Takashi Miyamura, to pay 11 million yen, and acknowledged their wrongdoing in confining Mr. Goto. But the Christian minister, Yasumoto Matsunaga, was tapped with 4.4 million yen to pay. But the wrongdoings or the liability was not recognized in Mr. Matsunaga's actions. And so it's an incredible step forward in that the Japanese courts recognize that there was wrongdoing, that it was a violation, and these family members need to be responsible for what they have done. But it's not a total victory in a sense that Mr. Matsunaga, who was heavily involved in all of these activities, was not responsible for the liability that he caused in the case of Mr. Goto. But again, it's a huge victory and a step forward for everybody who have fought for religious freedom. And now that we have a clear and an incredible precedent in the Japanese courts, going forward, different brothers and sisters who are still continually being kidnapped and abducted against their will and put through faith-breaking or deprogramming situations can have a better hope of getting some kind of a recognition of the violations that have taken place and rob them of their lives. And certainly when I think about Mr. Goto's situation, here is a son of God, a child of God, fighting for his right to practice religious freedom, fighting for his right to really exercise his faith in the way that he wants to. And it's just incredible that in this modern day, in one of the great superpowers of the world, that Mr. Goto's fight has been such an incredible battle of overcoming so many different obstacles along the way. But when I think about his story, it reminds me of this passage in the book of Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 11 through 15. And here we come to understand, here we're told about the parable of the sower. And this parable really kind of reminds me of Mr. Goto, in that the Gospel of Luke, we know, was written not so much to proselytize or to gain new converts, but it was written to kind of inspire and empower the existing Christian community. And it's an incredible work in that it really emphasizes the importance of being proactive, of being people of good action or deeds become incredibly important in the book of Luke. And in particular in this passage, we come to understand that here Jesus is talking about the 4 different ways that people can respond to the word of God. And in this parable, of course, the word seed means the word of God. And he talks about how the seed can be found in different situations or different settings, but it is really where the seed falls that will kind of determine whether the seed or the word of God will blossom into a proactive and an active faith, or whether it will just wither away, or whether, it never really gets started. And he gives 4 examples. And the first one, he says, is that is a situation where the seed falls on the path. And by that, he means that when you're on the path, you hear the truth, or you hear the word of God. But the devil, the daddy of all evil, the devil comes and takes the word from your heart. And therefore you cannot believe, and therefore you cannot be saved. And I thought this was kind of interesting because obviously the word made it into this person's heart. Meaning that because we are divine sons and daughters of God, when we hear the truth, we instinctively respond positively or favorably to the word. And it actually might be embraced in our hearts. But it's the devil that comes and snatches it away. And therefore we have no chance at really developing our belief and have a chance at being saved. In essence, something convinced us otherwise. Something convinced our hearts otherwise. Maybe the people on the path might have thought, oh, we know better. We know something about Jesus that you don't know. And therefore, I can be convinced that the words that came into my heart can be taken out by the devil, or by our logic, or maybe thinking that our knowledge knows more than what we're feeling. But regardless, the ones that are on the path never really get a good go at having a chance in terms of the seed taking root. The next one he talks about is a situation where the seed falls on the rock. And again, the people who hear on the rock, they hear the truth and they're actually joyful. They rejoice in the word, meaning that they are inspired and, their world has been illuminated by what they've heard. But because they have no root, they're not able to gain root through this incredibly dense rock that the seed sits on. With time and with the time of testing, their faith fall away and therefore yields no fruit. Then he talks about the third example, where the seed falls among the thorns. And here, in this situation, he says that, again, people hear and they're delighted. But due to the cares and the riches and the pleasure that are always knocking on their door, in a way, they don't have a chance to bear fruit. They hear the word, they delight in it, but that's to the extent that it goes. In a way, their chance at really having that strong faith or that strong belief has been squashed by the worries and the delights of the world. And, therefore they cannot bring forth any fruit. Then it talks about the fourth example of the kinds of people or the various ways that we can respond to the proclaimed word of God. And the fourth example is the seed falling on the good soil. And the good soil, the people who exemplifies it, they hear the word of God and they embrace what they're hearing, or the word of God, into their good and honest heart. And I find that incredibly inspiring, in that they don't just hear and let it, go in one ear and come out the other, but they embrace the preciousness of these proclaimed words of God into their heart, in a way making the words their own. And when he uses the word good and honest heart, it means a heart that is truthful, not just to everybody else, but truthful to yourself. So regardless of what the world might be thinking as to what you've heard from this, Jesus fellow, it really doesn't matter, because you are true to how you feel about what you've heard. And you are a good heart in that you receive these precious words Because you really want to love others. You really want to take care of others. And in so doing, not just hearing, but taking it and embracing it into your good and honest heart, you are able to bear fruit. And in this instance, bearing fruit means really bringing forth good deeds. In essence, the good deeds that come from you and me being inspired by the words is what a true disciple should be. In a way, the book of Luke teaches us two lessons, and the two lessons of this parable is very, very interesting to me, because, you know, when you read the parable of the sower, you realize that the writer of Luke is cognizant of the fact that this huge apocalyptic, powerful phenomenon that leaves you no choice but to believe in Jesus as the Christ didn't happen. And it's an acknowledgement of sorts that, look, Jesus came and he shared these words with us, but look at these 4 different ways that people can respond to the word. It's an acknowledgement that not everybody will respond to the word of Jesus positively, or the word of God positively. It's an acknowledgement that some people will never get Jesus Christ, and even if they hear, might be initially, wow, great, awesome. But then with the passing of time and with the cares and the riches and pleasures and the delights and the worries of the world will fall away. But it's only the ones that have been this good soil that will yield fruit. And so it's kind of showing us that, hey, if you want to be a true disciple, you got to do good works. You got to do the good deed. You got to be proactive. You got to be out there into the world, really sharing about what Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and not just be sitting in our own little house with our own little cares, with our own little delights or worries, or maybe dealing with all the different reasons as to why Jesus may not be Jesus. The point is, with the passing of time, the world came to realize, regardless of what the people 2,000 years thought about when they thought about Jesus, that he was the Son of God, that he was a child of God. He was a man of God. Even if you don't believe that Jesus is Christ, most people recognize that Jesus was a man of God. Well, fast forward 2,000 years, and here we are. We have true parents, we have our true Father, the Messiah, the second coming, who really came to share this incredible seed to all of us, or the Word of God. And still, to this day, there are various ways that people can respond to the world. In a way, many people have said to me, well, if your dad is the Messiah, well, why aren't the heavens opening up? Why aren't there apocalyptic powers that is going to force me to become a believer? And I usually point to the parable of the sower in the book of Luke. I said, look at the book of Luke. Jesus Christ was the Son of God. But even back then, people have asked the very same questions that you're asking me now. But just because you're asking and just because you don't believe, like some people did not believe back then, does not make Jesus Christ not the Messiah. And the same can be said of Reverend Moon and the true parents. But the incredible thing when I think about Mr. Goto is that here, we have 4 different types of various ways that we can respond to God's call. But Mr. Goto, in his struggle to really find the right, to have the right, to exercise the right, to enjoy religious freedom, had to go through an incredible battle. And we all know that if you want to be a good soil, anybody who's taken up gardening or tried to plant tomatoes out in the backyard, or plant different vegetables in their garden knows that in order for the seed to have the best go at it, you got to prepare the soil, right? And when you want to make your soil the best that it can be, what do we usually mix into the soil? We mix in fertilizer. And for those of you who've kind of grown up in farming towns, and I remember growing up in Korea, and there used to be in Sutengli, a huge workshop area where many brothers and sisters went. And when we traveled from Seoul to Sutengli, the minute you got close to the town, the stink of, the excrements from the cows and different animals that were used to fertilize or to create a good soil for the seeds. It was just mind-boggling, But sometimes that's what it takes to prepare a good soil. So, Father has said many times, sometimes, when you want to have a good faith, when you want to live a life of a faithful son and a daughter, that course is not always easy, because if you want to be the good soil, sometimes it takes a whole lot of fertilizer. Sometimes it takes a whole lot of crap. Sometimes it takes a whole lot of persecution, a whole lot of suffering. And certainly in the case of Mr. Goto, he, being an example of the good soil, had to deal with a lot of different fertilizers that he had to digest and continue on in order for him to bear fruit. And, it's kind of interesting how this man's, quiet suffering for 12 years and 5 months. We're not talking 12 months and 5 days. We're talking 12 years and 5 months. This man was robbed of his life. But he has, in essence, become the face for the fight for religious freedom. And in essence, he has become a face for me of home church, because all these years he was fighting his own family in order for him to practice or exercise his faith. In a way, he was battling with his family to do just that, and hopefully as the years go by, the family will come to understand, and hopefully Mr. Goto will be able to embrace and forgive his family to truly become an incredible family for God. I believe that can happen. And when you see Mr. Goto's, the life story and all the things that he had to go through, 3 hunger strikes, during his incarceration, severe punishment, severe malnutrition, and just all the different things that he had to go through, you realize that, my goodness, here is Mr. Goto. I mean, this is a man that my thinking should go to when I think my problem is all that. Because if you really think about it, a lot of our problems doesn't even compare to the kind of problems that Mr. Goto had to go through. But he never wavered. As that good soil, once he heard the word, and once that words came into his heart, he embraced it in his good and honest heart, and through endurance and perseverance was able to bear fruit. And his fruit is not only him coming out and being able to start family and raise beautiful family of his own, but his own suffering is bearing a much greater fruit. And that fruit is the victory in the realm, in the arena of religious freedom in Japan. And so when I think about him, and when I think about how his faith, or how his incredible determination and endurance and perseverance through difficult times really allows him to kind of really appreciate his family and still be that beacon of hope for a lot of brothers and sisters still kidnapped, still confined against their will, and still being violated. He can become an incredible incredible gift in terms of becoming that beacon of light for many, many people. And likewise, I feel that, at this time when all these different walls are coming down and our community is engulfed in changes. And many times, when people are dealing with changes that they don't want, because people in their own little pockets of comfort zones have deemed, their lives complete in some sense. And so all of these changes taking place, well, I don't want to deal with it. I'll just take the best that the church has to give me, but I don't want to deal with it. Well, the problem of thinking about life in that way is that the most precious gifts that we have in our lives come from true parents. If you are a second gen, your second gen community comes from God and true parents and your parents. You didn't just appear because you wanted to. It's because your parents believed as the good soil. And it's because true parents believed. And it's because God wanted to partake, wanted us to become really his partners in creating this beautiful world, that we are here. So if we can kind of remember to think of our lives really as a blessing, and not just a blessing for us to enjoy in our own little comfortable enclaves or in our little comfortable corner, but if we don't care about the rest of the world, guess what? Sooner or later, the world will catch up with our corner. And so if we say, well, we're comfortable now, and well, Mr. Goto's fight is his fight, but it really doesn't concern me because I live in America. Well, if the Americans don't fight for human rights and really fight for religious freedom, sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you and me. And so the whole point of being this good soil is to not be just boggled down with all the cares and all the worries, and not be, wondering who the heck we are because we have no root. God gave us a root, but perhaps it was us who chopped it off and said, we want to be free and do whatever we want. Maybe it's more fun without the root, but if we don't have an anchor, we will never have a place where we feel at home. And our anchor is God, and our anchor is true parents. And so if we can really kind of embrace that in our good and honest heart and work the work, of going through life to the best of our abilities with the grateful heart and never give up hope that God is there every step of the way, then we can do incredible things. So Mr. Goto is just one example, but I know that God is waiting for you and me. And if Mr. Goto, can one day yield great results with his own family or his home church, well, I know that God is waiting for your home church and my home church too. I've got a huge family and we've got lots of work to do. But how wonderful would it be if one day you and I, we can really offer Heavenly Parent and our true parents a rich harvest that we've cultivated over the years. I think it would be absolutely beautiful. So I encourage you to be the good soil and yield incredible, incredible results for your family, but also for God and true parents. So God bless and take care.
They say everything can be replaced. They say every distance is not near. Yet I remember every face of every man that put me in. I see my light come shining They say every man must need protection. They say every man will fall. But I swear I've seen my reflection someplace so high above the wall. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. And any day now, any day now, I shall be released. Yeah. Down here next to me in this lonely crowd, there is a man who swears he's not to blame. All day long I hear him shout it out so loud, crying out that he's been framed. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. And any day now, any day now, I shall be released. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released.
If you have any questions and comments, you can leave them below the video or go to injunmoon.com and use the contact form. And don't forget to subscribe to our email list. And for those of you who want to contribute to our work here at Our Home Church, please click on the donate button. Thank you. Bye-bye.